Good afternoon. I would like first of all to thank you all for attending this workshop on anti-dilution clauses in venture capital investments. Actually, the subject is very important for both founders of startups and investors, because in quite all the transactions involving an investment, we see anti-dilution clauses. So it is important to understand what they are. So what are anti-dilution clauses? They are clauses which are usually inserted in shareholders' agreements to the benefit of investors. I assume that you all know what shareholders' agreements are, right? The agreements governing the relationship between the shareholders of a company, and which contains some rules regarding the governance of the company, the taking of decisions, the transfer of shares, etc. So the anti-dilution clauses are clauses inserted in the shareholders' agreement to the benefit of investors. Why are they inserted in shareholders' agreement? What is their purpose? Their purpose is to protect an investor from dilution resulting from later issue of stock at a lower price than the investor originally paid. So basically, their purpose is to avoid dilution. But what is dilution? There are two sorts of dilution. First, a dilution in terms of percentage, which is a reduction in the ownership percentage caused by the issuance of new stock. In this case, let's say that A owns 20% of a company X, and then upon a capital increase, the ownership percentage of A is decreased. So he now owns 10% instead of 20%. And we say that he is diluted in terms of percentage. The second kind of dilution is the dilution in terms of value. In this case, there is a reduction in the value of the participation, although the ownership percentage remains unchanged. So let's say that A used to have 20% of a company X, and those 20% used to value $200. And then upon a capital increase, the value of those 20% is decreased, although the participation remains unchanged. So in this case, the dilution is a dilution in terms of value. In order to avoid the dilution, there are two sorts of remedies. A remedy to avoid dilution in terms of percentage, and this is the role of the preferential right, which is granted by Article 112 of the Code of Commerce in joint stock companies. What is the preferential right? The preferential right is the right granted to all the shareholders of a company to subscribe to a capital increase in priority or in preference to third parties. So let's say that a company is owned by A, B, and C, and an investor wishes to enter to the company, to invest in a company. A, B, and C will have the right to subscribe to such capital increase in priority to the new investor. And there is another remedy to avoid dilution, which is the inserting of ratchet clauses and of average weighted clauses. And this is the role of the anti-dilution clauses. I will try here to give some concrete examples just to illustrate the matter and to try to get things more clear. I will start with an analogy, which has nothing to do with law, but which will help me a little bit to make things clear. Let's say that a person A bought 10 pants at $10 each for a total price of $100. And then another person called B comes along to the same shop and buys 10 pants at $1 each for a total price of $10. So you see clearly here that the situation is unfair for A. So naturally, A will try to come back to the shop to talk to the manager and complain, saying, look, I have paid $100 and got 10 pants, whereas B has paid $10 only and got the same amount of pants. So I want to compensate my losses. And there are two ways to compensate A. Either on the basis of a full ratchet calculation or on the basis of a weighted average calculation. In a full ratchet calculation, A will come and will say, I have paid $100 and got 10 pounds. If I had paid like B $1 only for each pound, I would have received 100 pounds, right? So please give me the difference. I want the difference between the 100 and the 10 pounds, so give me 90 additional pounds at no additional cost. This is the full ratchet calculation. But there is another way to calculate, which is the weighted average calculation. In this scenario, the price of the pound will be calculated on the basis of an average between the price paid by A and the price paid by B. So the average would be 10 plus 1 equal 11 divided by 2 means 5.5. And A will come and say, I have paid $100 and received 10 pounds. If I had paid $5.5 for each pound, I should have received 18 pounds. So I want the difference, give me 8 additional pounds at no additional cost. So you see that the full ratchet calculation is more severe, whereas the weighted average calculation is milder, right? So let us try to apply all this to capital increases. I will take an example. A company which is incorporated with a capital of $150 and a total number of shares amounting to 150. The nominal value of the share being $1. The nominal value or the par value is calculated normally by dividing the capital by the total number of shares. So 150 divided by 150 equals $1. So the nominal value of the share is $1. The shareholding of the company upon incorporation would be as follows. A, B, and C are the shareholders. Each one of them owns 50 shares out of 150, which means 33.33% of the total capital. Clear? Now the company intends to effect a capital increase in the first round of investment by issuing 50 additional shares at an issue price of $5 per share. The issue price is not equal to the nominal price. It is higher than the nominal price. And the difference between the issue price and the nominal value is equal to 4, and it is considered as a premium, une prime d'émission en français, علاوة الإصدار. This premium integrates the reserves. So upon the first capital increase, there are two possibilities. Either A, B, and C, who are the founders of the company, will exercise their preferential right to subscribe to the capital increase, or they will not exercise their preferential right. I will try to see both possibilities. In the first scenario, A, B, and C do not exercise their preferential right. So all the new shares will be subscribed by investor 1. And in this case, the shareholding of the company upon the first round of investment would be as follows. Each of A, B, and C will hold 50 shares. Investor 1 will subscribe to the capital increase, to the 50 additional issued shares. And each one of the shareholders will hold now 25% of the capital. So you see that in this case, A, B, and C are diluted in terms of percentage. Why? Because their ownership percentage has decreased. You remember, upon the incorporation of the company, each one of them used to hold 33.33% of the company. And now, each one of them only owns 25% of the company. So their ownership percentage has decreased. And we say that they are diluted in terms of percentage. Now, what happens if A, B, and C exercise their preferential right granted to them by law? In this case, each of A, B, and C will subscribe to the capital increase, to the 50 additional shares, proportionally to their shareholding in the company. So each one of them will have 33.33% of the 50 additional issued shares. So each one of them will get 16 shares. And after the capital increase, A, B, and C will own each 66 shares. So 33.33% of the capital. And you see that by exercising their preferential right, A, B, and C have avoided the dilution in terms of percentage because their ownership percentage has been maintained as is. Right? Then the company decides to effect a second capital increase in a second round of investment by an issuance of 50 additional shares at an issue price lower than the price paid by investor one. You remember that upon the first capital increase, the shares were issued at a unit price of $5. And now the company is issuing 50 additional shares at $3 per share. So at a price that is lower than the price paid by investor one. And we will see here two possibilities. The first possibility is where A, B, C, and investor one do not exercise their preferential right. So all the new shares will be subscribed by investor two. And the shareholding of the company upon the second round of investment would be as follows. Each of A, B, C, and investor one will hold 50 shares, so 20% of the capital, and investor two will subscribe entirely to the 50 additional issued shares and will get 50 shares and 20% of the company. So you see that in this case, A, B, C, and investor one are diluted in terms of percentage. Why? Because their respective ownership percentages have decreased. They used to have 25% each of the capital, and now they only have 20% of the capital. Moreover, investor one is diluted in terms of value. So not only in terms of percentage, but also in terms of value. Why? Because he had 50 shares which value amounted to $5 each, so 250 in total. And now, at the new valuation, he has 50 shares which value amounts to $3 each, so $150 in total. So the value of his ownership has decreased, not only the percentage. So he is being diluted not only in terms of percentage, but also in terms of value. In the second possibility, where A, B, C, and investor one exercise their preferential right, they will avoid a dilution in terms of percentage. The shareholding upon the second round of investment would be as follows. Each of A, B, C, and investor one would get 25% of the 50 additional issued shares, because they are subscribing to the capital increase pro rata to their respective participation in the company, proportionally to their respective participation in the company. So each one of them will get 25% of the 50 additional issued shares. So after the second capital increase, each one of them will hold 62.5 shares and 25% of the company's capital. So you see that A, B, C, and investor one are not diluted in terms of percentage because by exercising their preferential right, they have avoided such dilution, and their respective ownership percentage are not changed. They are still at 25% each of the company's capital. However, in terms of value, investor one is still diluted. So even if he is not diluted in terms of percentage because he has kept the 25% ownership percentage, he is still being diluted in terms of value. Why? Because he had 50 shares which value amounted to $5 each, i.e. $250 in total, and now he has 62.5 shares, which value amount now to $3 each, according to the new valuation, i.e. 187.5 in total. So his ownership value has decreased. So although investor one has exercised his preferential right to subscribe to the capital increase, he is still diluted in terms of value. And this is why investor one should insert anti-dilution clauses in his shareholder agreement in order to avoid such dilution in terms of value. So how shall investor one be compensated of such loss of value? There are two ways to compensate investor one, either by applying a full ratchet calculation or by applying a weighted average calculation. In the full ratchet calculation, investor one will require that the new issue price paid by investor two, i.e. $3, be applied to him retroactively. He will come and say, I have paid upon the first capital increase $250 and I have received 50 shares. If I had paid like investor two $3 per share instead of 5, I should have received 83 shares. So I want the difference. Give me 33 additional shares at no additional cost. This is the full ratchet calculation. There is another way to calculate and to compensate investor one, which is the weighted average calculation. In this scenario, investor one will require that an average reference issue price be applied to him retroactively. And the reference price will be calculated by adding the value of the company before the second capital increase to the value added by investor two and dividing the total by the total number of shares. So here, before the capital increase, there were 200 shares times $5, which is the issue price upon the first capital increase. I will add the result to 50 times 3, 50 being the number of additional shares issued upon the second capital increase, and 3 being the new issue price. And I divide the total by 250, the result would be 4.6. In this scenario, investor one would come and say, I have paid upon the first capital increase $250 and received 50 shares. If I had paid the reference price, which is an average between the first issue price and the second price, I should have received 54 shares instead of 50. So give me 4 additional shares at no additional cost. But concretely, how will all this happen? There are several adjustment mechanisms. The first adjustment mechanism would be a retrocession. In this case, the founders of the company would commit to assign to investor one, pro rata between them, the necessary number of shares to compensate his loss. So actually, A, B, and C will give investor one additional shares in order to compensate the loss of value. And in this case, clearly, the founders will lose some of their shares. Another way to do is to allocate the premium, la prime d'émission, which is the difference between the issue price and the nominal price. The premium would be, in this scenario, allocated to the issuance of the necessary number of shares. In this case, the founders will not lose shares, but they will still be diluted in terms of percentage because there will be newly issued shares. And the main disadvantage of this scenario is that the company will not fully benefit from the money injection. The company wanted to get money, right? So the money the company is getting, instead of integrating this money into the reserves, I am using this reserve to compensate investor one. So this is the main disadvantage of this scenario. In conclusion, You see that the full ratchet clauses are more favorable to investors, whereas founders should try to negotiate weighted average clauses. And in all cases, anti-dilution clauses should be negotiated with the utmost care in order to avoid their paradoxical effect. Thank you. If you have any question, you would be welcome to ask them now.
Thank you for the presentation, Maître Khouryati. I had a question. When we say that there is the founders, A, B, C, if they weren't founders, let's consider they are not founders. There was the first round of investment, and there was the second round of investment where they lost in value. The investor one lost in value. Can we consider that A, B, and C also lost in value, given that according to the previous valuation, so can they also ask for a weighted average? I mean, do we consider when an investor comes, do we consider if he lost on value on the time when he bought the shares or at the latest valuation? Sorry.
No, the reference time is the time at which investor one has injected money in the company. So it's upon the capital increase, the first capital increase. The valuation of the company at $5 per share has been effected upon the first capital increase. So if the value of the company decreases further to this first capital increase, in this case you apply the anti-dilution clause. But I agree with you, also A, B, and C are diluted in terms of value. But usually the anti-dilution clauses are applied or are inserted in shareholders' agreement to protect the interests of an investor. I mean, the founders would not insert anti-dilution clauses to protect themselves. Usually such clauses are inserted to protect the investment of the investor, right?
Let's say that there was a third round, and the first two rounds was always with an added value on the shares. So the investor one came at a value of $1. Investor two came at a value of $3. The investor three came at a value of $2. Do the investor one also has the right to ask for compensation? He came at the yes, okay, so it's in comparison of not the latest valuation, it's a comparison on when the investor came in. Okay, thank you very much.
Any other question?
Usually when I know that the right of first refusal that shareholders in a joint stock company have to subscribe to newly issued capital when there's an increase of capital is inserted in the bylaws of a company, usually by default. And it's, yes, by law, by the Code of Commerce. But what about and it will be enforceable. What about the shareholder agreement in which those anti-dilution clauses are inserted? How do you ensure the enforcement of those clauses? And if the company does not oblige or does not execute those clauses, what do you have as remedies?
It's a simple recourse to the courts, because you would claim, you would file a lawsuit against the company or the founders, depending on whether it's a retrocession or an allocation of the reserves. Because if it's a retrocession, the founders would be committing to give you additional shares. So you would sue the founders. If it's an allocation of the premium, you would sue the company. But yeah, this is what usually what is usually done is to make an issuance of سندات قابلة للتحويل إلى أسهم. If you know what I mean. The investor subscribes to such securities upon entering to the company. So in this case, he can oblige the company to convert those securities to shares. You see? It's a in terms of percentage or value? No, in terms of value.
So I was asking, what's the remedy that an investor has when the anti-dilution clause is inserted in virtue of a shareholder agreement rather than in the bylaws of the company, like the right of first refusal that shareholders have by law to subscribe to newly issued capital. And the question was, how can you enforce this clause judicially or voluntarily when there's a dispute?
If you cannot oblige the company to do it, you would ask for compensation. Otherwise, if you adopt the mechanism of سندات قابلة للتحويل إلى أسهم, you would have resolved the problem. Because you would just convert those securities into shares. Yes, upon the capital increase. You're welcome.
You mentioned there are two ways to compensate the investor in terms of execution. Either you issue new shares, either you transfer existing shares from the existing shareholders, founders, to the investor, or you just issue new shares. In Lebanon, how can you issue new shares without the new investor paying at least the par value, the nominal value of the share?
The premium would be allocated to the issuance of the new shares, regardless of the new investor. The premium, which is the difference between the issue price and the nominal value of the share, instead of integrating the reserve, the premium would be allocated to the issuance of the additional needed shares.
When you're issuing new shares, you will be issuing new nominal shares, right? So the capital of the company is increasing, regardless of what's happening on the premium book side. The nominal, the number of shares of the company is increasing, and in the registry of the Ministry of Commerce, how can they issue new shares without generating new? I mean, without collecting the nominal value of the.
This money would be collected, but out of the reserve. Instead of injecting money, you would transfer from the reserves the amount of money needed to effect your capital increase. Yes, you need just an extraordinary General Assembly. That's all? Any other question? I will increase my annual fees.
It's a question that's not really related. We were talking about the preferential right, and we took the case where all shareholders, A, B, C, and D, are exercising this preferential right. If B, C, and D don't want to exercise this preferential right, and only A wants it, is it pro rata, or is it he can exercise it for the full new issuance of shares, or is it pro rata to his shareholding? So the difference goes to the
Yes. That's all. Thank you very much.